The first winter winds swept through the cobblestone streets of Chicago, tossing thin veils of snow across the sidewalks. The lights from Meridian Tower shimmered against the surface of Lake Michigan like a strip of galaxy scattered across the city. Inside the 58th floor, the Meridian Hall glowed with laughter, clinking crystal glasses, and the soft hum of jazz that seemed to float in the air. Emily Cooper stood before the full-length mirror in the restaurant's dressing room, her fingers lightly brushing the red dress that Cameron, her fiancé, had insisted she wear tonight. "Burgundy looks better under candlelight," he had said with the self-assurance of a man used to controlling everything. "And it makes you look like a reward." At the time, Emily had simply smiled and let it pass. She had learned not to argue. After 3 years together, she understood that Cameron didn't like women with strong opinions. He liked agreement, silence, and perfection, and she was tired of always being perfect. But tonight, she told herself would be different. A year since he proposed, she hoped he had changed. Maybe there would be an apology for the months he had ignored her during campaign season. Maybe a hug, or at least a sign that love still existed between them. Emily adjusted her lipstick, drew a deep breath, and stepped out. The restaurant glittered with familiar faces. Financiers, media figures, men in tailored suits, and women with perfect practice smiles. Crystal chandeliers caught the red sheen of her dress, making her look like fire amid the crowd. "Miss Cooper, your table is ready," the waiter said politely, though his eyes betrayed a strange pity, as if he already knew something she didn't. Cameron sat at the center table, the best seat in the house, where every eye could easily find him. But what stopped Emily cold wasn't the light or the music. It was the woman sitting across from him. Sophia Layton, wavy blonde hair, a pristine white satin dress, and a smile that could make the whole room hold its breath. She'd been on the cover of Forbes' Daughter of the largest media tycoon in Illinois. A flawless woman by the standards of the world, Cameron was desperate to enter. Emily stopped 3 meters away. Cameron looked up, calm, expressionless. "You're here," he said evenly. "Sit down, Emily. We need to talk." She didn't sit. Her heartbeat pounded. Something was wrong. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cameron inhaled slowly, glancing around as if preparing for a speech. "I think it's time we're honest. I'm running for Senate. This path requires a suitable partner. Sophia understands my world, and..." He paused, giving her a look that carried both pity and condescension. "She's the right choice." The crowded room fell into an eerie silence. Some people turned. A few phones were already recording. Emily froze. Her whole body turned to stone. "You're breaking up with me? Here in front of everyone?" "Please don't make a scene," Cameron whispered, still smiling for the cameras. "I want this to end peacefully. You'll be fine." Sophia leaned forward, smiling gently and sharply. "He only wants what's best for both of you. You're young, talented, you'll find someone more suited to your world." The glass in Emily's hand trembled. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth. She should have walked away. She should have kept her pride. But when she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "You said you loved me." Cameron looked down, silent. Then, as if it had been rehearsed, he took the engagement ring from his pocket, the one she used to wear, and placed it on the table like a completed transaction. The room buzzed with whispers. Camera flashes flickered. Emily knew this scene would be everywhere within hours. She bent down, picked up her purse, her voice hoarse. "Keep the ring, Cameron. You've already paid enough for it." Then she turned and walked out through a sea of eyes that were half pity, half curiosity. Outside, snow fell thick. The air bit through her skin. Emily walked aimlessly, heels clicking sharply against the cold pavement, echoing through the distance like the sound of something breaking. When her feet went numb, she sat down on the curb of a narrow alley. Her eyes burned. Her lips trembled, but she bit down hard. She wouldn't cry. She had promised herself no one would ever see her weak again. But the tears came anyway. "He wasn't worth it," she whispered into the freezing air. A black car stopped at the mouth of the alley. No honk, just the sweep of headlights through the falling snow before they flicked off. A man stepped out, tall, long coat. Half his face shadowed. His voice was low, rough, and commanding. "It's freezing. You should get up." Emily wiped her tears without looking up. "I don't need help." "Maybe not, But in a few minutes, reporters from the Chicago Tribune will. Your photo on this sidewalk will be front-page news by morning. She froze. Who are you? The man bent down slightly, a business card sliding from his gloved fingers into her hand. Embossed in silver letters, Henry Whitman, Whitman Group Holdings. Her brow furrowed. The name was familiar from headlines linked to shadow deals, underground ties, mafia connections. What do you want? She asked warily. Henry tilted his head, his deep brown eyes studying her as if assessing her, or perhaps recognizing something he already knew. I want to help you, but not for free. Emily gripped the card tighter. So this is your kind of help. Buying desperate people. He smiled faintly arrogant, but also somehow sad. No, I just invest wisely. And you, Miss Cooper, are the most interesting investment I've seen. Before she could respond, his voice turned quiet, steady like an order. Get in the car. Emily Cooper. Tonight, Chicago can be crueler than you think. Her name on his lips made her flinch. She hadn't told him. You know who I am. Henry slipped his hands into his pockets, his gaze calm but dangerous. I know enough to say Cameron Reed won't be sitting in that Senate chair much longer. If you want to return the favor for what he did tonight, I have a way. The wind howled. His coat flared, a dark shadow cutting through the white snow. Emily stood still, instincts screaming to run. But something in his voice, his eyes, or the burning ache inside her made her stay. Part of her feared Henry. Another part was intrigued. Suppose I want to hear your way, she said hoarsely. Then what? Henry opened the car door, not looking back. His reply was simple. Then you'll never be humiliated again. The luxury car waited silently under the snow. Inside, the soft glow of cabin lights reflected off dark leather seats, carrying the faint scent of smoke and skin. Emily stood at the threshold between a shattered past and an uncertain future. She took a deep breath and stepped in. The door closed behind her, sealing out the cold. Henry nodded to the driver. Take us home. The car pulled away, carrying two strangers, one who had lost everything and one who no longer believed in love, into the snowy streets of Chicago, where red lights glimmered in the rearview mirror like a promise of destiny yet to come. Sometimes fate doesn't begin with safe choices, but with the moment you dare to step into a stranger's car. If you believe love can be born from a mistake, stay tuned for part 2, The Man in the House by the Lake. The car glided quietly through snow-covered roads, the only sounds being the steady hum of the tires against wet asphalt, and a faint trace of jazz playing on the radio. Inside, the soft light brushed across Emily's cheekbones, illuminating the conflict in her eyes, a mix of pride and confusion. Henry Whitman sat beside her, posture, straight black leather gloves, on his deep brown eyes fixed ahead. He didn't need to look at her. His presence was enough to command attention. The kind of authority that seemed to make every surrounding sound fall silent by instinct. As the car crossed a bridge over Lake Michigan, Emily realized they were leaving downtown. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by the stillness of the suburbs, where bare trees cast long shadows over the frozen lake. Where are you taking me? She asked, her voice husky but steady. Henry glanced at the window, his tone even. Somewhere you can breathe again, or at least think without reporters following you. I didn't ask for your help. This wouldn't be the first time I helped someone who didn't. His reply silenced her. There was something in his voice, not arrogance, but the weary calm of a man long used to being misunderstood. They arrived just past 11. The house sat hidden behind tall pine trees facing the vast stretch of Lake Michigan, the moonlight turning the frozen surface silver. It wasn't a mansion in the traditional sense, but a structure of sharp lines and glass, modern, cold, and breathtakingly beautiful. Its clear panels reflected the darkness like it belonged there, born from solitude itself. Henry stepped out, opened her door, and extended a hand. Emily hesitated. You can walk if you'd like, he said evenly, but the stone path is cold enough to cut through your skin. Finally, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, firm, controlled yet detached, a contrast that made her unsure whether to pull away or hold on. Inside, the silence was almost tangible. She could hear the wind threading through the window panes. The living room was vast, high-ceilinged, softly lit. Minimalist, but every detail deliberate, elegant in restraint. No family photos. No trace of another soul, except for the faint scent of leather and sandalwood lingering in the air. "You live here alone?" Emily asked as Henry hung his coat. "With a few demons," he murmured. She frowned, but before she could question, he poured a glass of red wine and a cup of warm water, which he placed before her. "Drink. You're shaking. Do you always talk like you're giving orders?" He leaned casually against the kitchen counter, half smiling. "I'm used to being obeyed. But you don't seem like one of them. Maybe because I don't belong in your world." Or maybe he said, his gaze lingering on her slow, deliberate, unsettlingly perceptive, "You just stepped into it." Emily set the cup down, inhaling sharply. "Who are you really? Henry Whitman? A businessman or a criminal?" He didn't look offended. "I'm someone who knows exactly where the law ends and the shadows begin, and when to cross that line. That doesn't make me feel safer. It's not supposed to help you sleep." She let out a quiet, humorless laugh, uncertain if it came from fear or exhaustion. "So I'm supposed to trust a stranger who calls himself a savior?" Henry moved closer, stopping less than half a meter away. The scent of him wood leather smoke mixed with the night air. His voice dropped low, steady enough to throw her pulse off rhythm. "No, I don't need you to trust me. I just need you to listen." She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "And if I don't?" "Then tomorrow morning, your name will be on the front page of the Chicago Herald. Architect publicly dumped victim or opportunist." Emily froze. "Are you threatening me?" "No," he said, eyes unblinking. "I'm telling you the truth. And in this world, truth is the cruelest weapon of all." Silence stretched between them. Henry turned toward the window overlooking the lake. His voice dropped lower. Cameron Reed reached for hands he shouldn't have. He thought they would help him rise higher. But a young politician never realizes the hands he shakes are always the ones stained with blood. Emily shivered. "You're talking about your world, aren't you?" Henry turned back to her, his gaze dark as the night outside. "I don't rule that world. I just keep it from falling apart." She didn't respond, but in her mind, puzzle pieces began to align. The name Whitman, she'd seen it in the news before. A vast empire in construction investments logistics. And whispers of money laundering. She looked at him, unsure whether to feel fear or gratitude. "What do you really want from me?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You want your name back. I want someone who can convince the media I still have a heart." She let out a soft laugh, incredulous. "You're saying you need a fake wife?" "Not fake," he corrected. "Contractual, 6 months, legal. I clear your reputation. You calm certain investors who find me difficult to humanize. After that, we go our separate ways." The words hung in the air, weightless yet crushing. Emily swallowed hard. "I'm not a commodity, Henry." "And I don't buy people," he said calmly. "I'm offering a deal that benefits us both. You won't have to run anymore, and His voice softened almost a whisper. "Won't have to pretend I feel nothing." Night deepened. The house glowed in amber light, while outside snow drifted down like ashes. Emily stepped onto the balcony, letting the cold sting her skin, a reminder she was still real. She thought of Cameron, of the ring he'd tossed aside like something worthless, of the eyes watching the whispers, the humiliation. And then of this man, cold, dangerous, yet the only one who hadn't looked at her with pity. Footsteps approached. Henry draped a gray sweater over her shoulders. "Do you really think I'll sign that ridiculous contract?" she asked, staring at the lake. "Not tonight," he replied. "But you'll think about it. Because you know people only respect women who possess something men are afraid to lose." She turned to face him. "And you, Henry Whitman? What are you afraid to lose?" His eyes darkened for a second before drifting away. "I already lost it. I just haven't learned how to let go." A gust of wind swept past, carrying a strand of her hair across her face. He reached up instinctively, brushing it away. It was a small gesture, but it made her heartbeat falter. "You should sleep," he said quietly. "If you want to leave in the morning, the car will take you back to the city. And if I stay, Henry looked at her for a long time, long enough for the moon to seem to pause in its arc. Then you won't be the same when you leave. That night, Emily lay awake in the guest room, unable to close her eyes. Outside, snow blanketed the world in white. The lake reflected the moon like a giant mirror. She replayed his words, each silence between them felt like a test. He wasn't just hiding power, he was hiding pain. Maybe he didn't just need her to fix his image. Maybe he needed someone to make him believe he could still be trusted. And she, amid the ruins of her pride, felt something strange. Not fear of Henry, but fear of herself. Fear of what she felt when he spoke, when his gaze met hers, the way her heart skipped as if remembering something it shouldn't. Past midnight, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I'm not a good man, but I won't let anyone step on you again. H. Emily smiled faintly, placing the phone over her chest, feeling her heartbeat race. She didn't know what she'd do in the morning, leave or stay. All she knew was that for the first time in years, life felt unpredictable again. Outside, the wind swept across the lake, carrying the ghostly light of the moon. And inside the house by the water, two strangers stood at the edge of something dangerous. A game of emotion and deceit, where no one knew who would break first. Morning came slower by the lake than in the city. The first sunlight slipped faintly through a thin layer of mist, glimmering over the frozen water. Emily woke to a strange stillness. The gentle lap of waves against the shore sounded like winter breathing in its sleep. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was, the guest room of Henry Whitman's house. The man she had met less than 12 hours ago yet, who had already turned her world upside down. She slipped on a gray sweater and stepped out of the room. The scent of coffee drifted through the air. In the kitchen across the hall, Henry stood with his back to her white shirt sleeves rolled up, posture straight, exuding the kind of calm that made the entire house seem to revolve around him. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Coffee or tea? Coffee, Emily replied softly. No sugar, right? She froze. How do you know that? Henry smiled faintly as he filled the porcelain cup. People who like to control their emotions usually don't like sweetness. Just a guess. The simple remark struck somewhere deep within her. She accepted the cup, the heat spread through her hands, easing the awkwardness a little. Thank you for not letting me sleep on the streets last night. It's nothing, he said. I just don't like seeing the weak get crushed. You think I'm weak? No. Henry's gaze met hers, deep and still like the lake beyond the window. I think you're strong enough not to notice when you're bleeding. Emily said nothing. For the first time in days, she didn't want to argue. After breakfast, Henry took her for a walk around the property. The house sat nestled between tall pines, with a narrow wooden bridge stretching toward the frozen lake. Sunlight shimmered on the ice, scattering into 1,000 crystal shards. Do you really live here alone? She asked quietly. Occasionally someone visits, but most of the time, yes, it's just me. That sounds lonely. He smiled slightly, though his eyes didn't. Loneliness is a form of safety. You can't get hurt if no one is close enough to reach you. She tilted her head at him. So that's why you built this wall? A house of glass looking out to the lake, but sealed off from everything else. Henry stopped walking. The light caught his face, revealing a faint scar near his temple, one she hadn't noticed the night before. The wall doesn't protect me from the world. It protects the world from me. His voice was quiet, heavy, as if every word carried the echo of an old wound. Emily didn't ask further. Some truths she knew were meant to stay half-spoken. By afternoon, the snow began to fall thick. Henry stayed mostly in his office. The door closed, only his deep voice leaking through now and then, between papers rustling and phone calls murmured in a language of power. Emily sat in the living room, eyes fixed on the news, replaying last night's scene, the viral video of Cameron humiliating her in front of hundreds. She turned the TV off. The black screen reflected her own face, the woman in the red dress, proud and broken. Henry appeared behind her, silent for a long moment before saying, You don't have to relive the past to punish yourself. You think that's what I'm doing? Most people can't stand to look at the moment they fell. They choose to forget. You didn't. Emily let out a dry laugh. Forget. When it's being shared hundreds of thousands of times online, Henry sat across from her leg, crossed eyes never leaving hers. That's why I made you an offer. She folded her arms, gaze sharpening. Back to the contract again. You need a chance. I need a reason. A reason for what? Henry leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, his tone low. To make people believe Henry Whitman is capable of love. The men in finance are waiting for me to crack. A wife makes them believe I'm stable, that I'm still human. Emily let out a small laugh, though her pulse quickened. So I'm just a prop in your performance? No. You're the only one I believe could make it look real. The words silenced her. Henry rose, walked to his desk, and pulled open a drawer. He placed a sheet of crisp white paper before her. This is the contract. 6 months. Your name becomes Emily Whitman, my legal wife. You're free to work travel live as you wish, but you'll attend certain events with me. After 6 months, I'll transfer $500,000 to your account. Everything by the book. She picked up the document, scanning through it. Every clause was clear, concise, and utterly emotionless. No sexual terms, she asked quietly. No. This is an arrangement, not an affair. And if I say no, Henry looked up calm and steady. Then you leave. I don't force anyone into my darkness. Just remember, when the light turns its back, the only open door left is the dark. She folded the papers and walked toward the glass wall facing the lake. Her reflection stared back, small but unyielding. Why me? She asked after a long pause. Henry's answer came without hesitation. Because you're not afraid of me. She turned to him, startled. You're wrong. I am afraid. No. He took a step closer, his voice deep and low. You're cautious, not afraid. Most people look at me and see danger. You see someone fighting not to fall. The space between them shrank to a single breath. She could feel his warmth, smell the faint trace of coffee and smoke. You're good at reading people, she murmured. It's how I survive. But who reads you? She asked softly. Henry closed his eyes briefly, a weary smile ghosting across his lips. No one's lived long enough to try. A long silence settled between them. The clock ticked. Snow whispered outside. Finally, Emily said quietly, Do you have a pen? Henry slowly handed her a black fountain pen. Without another word, she signed her name at the bottom of the page. The ink bled faintly into the paper, like the final mark on a life she no longer owned. When she looked up, Henry's eyes showed a flicker of surprise. You're not going to think it over? No, she said evenly. I've already lost everything. If I'm starting over, it might as well be somewhere no one else dares to. He studied her for a long second, then nodded once. From now on, you'll stay here. I'll handle the legal paperwork. The wedding is in 3 days private quiet. And Emily, one thing you need to remember. He looked directly into her eyes, amber and shadowed, fierce and still. Never trust me completely. Not even when I smile. That night, the snow fell heavier. Emily stood in her room, staring out the large glass window at the lake below. The lights reflected dimly over the frozen surface like blurred memories. On the table lay the contract, her signature dried into a dark streak. Her fingers brushed against it, fear and freedom tangled into one feeling. Down in the yard, Henry was on the phone. From where she stood, she could only see his silhouette. Tall, composed, his shadow stretching long across the snow. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. No words were exchanged. Yet his stare, deep, cold, unreadable, made her feel as though she were standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for a signal to step forward. In that moment, Emily realized she hadn't signed a contract. She'd made a pact between light and shadow where trust had no place, and yet somehow something like love had already begun to stir within the fear. Below the hill, the wind rushed through the pines, carrying with it a distant echo, perhaps a warning, or the prelude to a destiny neither of them yet understood. 3 days later, Chicago dressed itself in winter's splendor. The city glimmered beneath a haze of frost and champagne light as it prepared for the annual charity gala, the grandest event of the season, sponsored by the Whitman Group. But this year, the headlines weren't about the Whitman Group. They were about Henry Whitman's new wife. Emily stood before the mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the pearl necklace resting on her collarbone. The dark blue gown hugged her silhouette perfectly, its satin sheen catching the golden glow of the lamp. A stylist nearby murmured, "Mr. Whitman said you should wear your hair down tonight. He said the wind would do the rest." Emily gave a faint smile, her reflection staring back the eyes in the mirror, no longer belonged to the same woman she had been weeks ago. She didn't know what it was about Henry that had made her step into this strange marriage. Perhaps pride? Or perhaps curiosity, the dangerous kind that lives in the space between fear and fascination. Henry appeared in the doorway. His black suit fit flawlessly, the silver tie gleaming like a blade. Every movement he made carried a composed stillness, the kind that quieted the air around him. "Ready?" he asked softly. Not a command, but something that made her lift her gaze anyway. "You always issue orders with such a gentle tone," she teased. "Not orders," he said, walking closer. "Reminders. Because I know you hate being told what to do." She tilted her head, smiling faintly. "And you hate being refused, don't you?" Henry's lips curved, barely a rare smile that never reached his eyes. Yet somehow made the room warmer. "We're more alike than you think, Emily Cooper." He extended his hand. She placed hers in his. His palm was warm, but her fingers were cold. "Let's go," Henry murmured. "The city's waiting to see if you're worthy of the name Mrs. Whitman." The gala was held at the Lakeshore Grand Hotel, where chandeliers cascaded down like rivers of light. Reporters crowded the entrance, flashes exploding in waves as the Whitman car pulled up. Henry stepped out first, then opened the door for Emily. When she emerged, 1,000 cameras fired at once. In that instant, Emily realized what she had once feared she now commanded. No one looked at her with pity anymore. She was the woman beside Henry Whitman, a symbol of power and mystery. Henry leaned close, whispering against the storm of light and noise. "Breathe it in. This is the scent of the stage you chose." Inside, the air buzzed with champagne laughter, crystal clinks and strings of soft jazz. Henry moved through the crowd with the calm dominance of a wolf long used to being watched. Emily walked beside him, graceful, deliberate. Her smile measured her eyes, cool yet soft. A few men approached to shake Henry's hand, their greetings heavy with unspoken politics. She didn't follow the conversation, but she sensed the tension, a blend of admiration and unease. Whitman, a voice with an Italian accent, purred behind them, smooth as silk but sharp as glass. Henry turned. "Venturi," he said quietly. Emily studied the man, mid-40s, silver-streaked hair, white suit, eyes like polished steel. "I hear you're married," Venturi said with a half-smile. "And I wasn't invited." Henry's tone stayed calm. "You don't usually bless other people's happiness." Venturi chuckled softly, then turned to Emily. "So this must be the woman the whole of Chicago's whispering about. I'll admit, Whitman, your taste has improved." Henry shifted slightly, placing a firm but subtle hand on the small of her back, a gesture of possession and protection all at once. "Don't measure her by your habits, Marco. I don't play your games." The temperature around them seemed to drop. Emily felt the invisible current between the two men, something older than rivalry, sharper than words. Venturi sipped his wine, his eyes never leaving her. "Careful, darling. Henry has a habit of keeping everything he touches, even after it breaks." The words slid into her like the tip of a cold knife. Henry's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder. "Ignore him," he said softly. "Wolves howl when someone steals their moonlight." She gave a faint laugh despite the chill in her chest. "You make it sound like I'm the moon." "No," Henry said, his voice unexpectedly tender. "You're the sunrise they don't know how to wait for." The evening went on, glittering and loud, but inside, Emily, unease stirred. Every time Henry stepped away to speak privately with someone, she could feel Venturi's eyes following her. His stare wasn't curiosity, it was calculation, a silent threat. Later, passing through a quiet corridor, Emily caught the sound of voices, low, tense behind a paneled wall. Henry's voice first clipped and cold. "You still can't let it go, can you, Venturi?" Then Venturi's calm but edged with venom. "Letting go is easy. Forgiving isn't. Not when the dead was one of mine." Emily froze. "The dead?" Her pulse spiked. This wasn't business rivalry. It was something darker, older. She stepped back, her hand trembling, and accidentally dropped her glass. The sound of shattering crystal sliced through the hush. Henry turned instantly. For a second, his eyes flashed sharp, dangerous, the kind of look that could freeze blood. But when he saw her, the edge faded. "Are you all right?" His voice softened. I heard." He placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. "Don't listen to things that aren't meant for you." The gentleness of his tone couldn't hide the warning in his grip. Emily nodded, saying nothing. Back in the ballroom, she smiled through the rest of the night, but her mind was tangled. Every greeting, every camera flash, felt like a mask, hiding something else. When the gala finally ended, Henry led her to the car. Outside, the snow had thickened, falling under a pale, bruised sky. "Who is Venturi really?" she asked at last, once the city lights began to blur through the window. Henry looked out his reflection framed in the glass gold and shadowed. "He was a friend," he said quietly. "Now he's the man who buried my wife." The air inside the car turned to ice. The words fell into her chest like stones sinking through still water. "Your wife?" she whispered. "Grace," he said after a pause. "She died in a car explosion 3 years ago. Venturi believes I caused it, and I have never forgiven myself." The silence that followed was long, heavy, broken only by the wind seeping through the edges of the window. Emily turned to look at him. His profile was unshaken, almost serene, but in his eyes, she saw the quiet ruin of a man who had survived something no one should have to. "Henry," she said softly, "do you believe in forgiveness?" He didn't look at her. When he spoke, it was barely a whisper. "No, I believe in consequences." When they arrived at the lake house, Emily remained seated, watching the snow fall thick against the glass. Henry opened the door, cold air rushing in, but she didn't move. He looked at her, his eyes both stern and strangely gentle. "Are you afraid of me or of something else?" She smiled faintly, slipping her hand into his as she stepped out. "Both." Henry gave a small nod. He didn't press further. He led her back inside. Behind them, Lake Michigan lay silent beneath the snow. Inside, the fireplace crackled with soft orange light, but the fire in their eyes burned of another kind, darker, unnamed. Henry poured her a glass of wine and set it before her. "They say everyone who enters my world pays a price. Are you ready for yours?" Emily met his gaze, steady, unwavering. "Maybe I already paid it the day I signed my name." Henry studied her for a moment, then smiled, faint, unreadable. "Then don't look back anymore, Emily Whitman." Outside the glass walls, snow kept falling. Inside, 2 glasses of red wine shimmered like liquid fire. And beyond the window, the wild orchids in the frozen garden stirred in the wind, the flowers that bloomed only in winter. Just like this strange, dangerous tenderness beginning to take root between 2 lost souls. The morning after the gala, Lake Michigan shimmered in pale silver light. Snow still blanketed the ground, yet inside Henry Whitman's house, the air felt different, heavy and hushed, as if every sound had gone into hiding. Emily sat in her workspace, the room Henry had told her belongs to you now since the day she signed the contract. On her desk lay unfinished blueprints for the Red Hook Industrial Redevelopment Project, something she'd taken on to keep herself busy, or perhaps to forget that she was living inside a story without an ending. Her hand froze as she flipped through the file. The technical drawings had been modified not by her. The changes were subtle but telling, reinforced load-bearing structures doubled wall thickness. The kind of adjustments that only someone in architecture would notice. And they no longer resembled plans for a civilian construction. Henry appeared at the doorway without knocking. "You're up earlier than I expected." Emily nodded faintly. "There's something off about the Red Hook project." He stepped closer, glancing over her shoulder. "What part of it, the updated drawings? The substructure, it's not for housing. It's designed to carry a much heavier load." Henry was silent, one hand in his pocket, his eyes scanning the symbols on the page. She noticed then he wasn't surprised. "You knew about this." Her voice trembled slightly. Henry lifted his gaze, meeting hers, his eyes darkened. "There are things you don't need to understand." "Not yet." Emily took a step back. "And you expect me to stay quiet?" No, he said evenly. But I expect you to know when to ask. The words were soft, yet the air thickened with something unspoken, a boundary invisible but undeniable. By noon, Henry had left the house. He said there was a meeting with the investment board. Emily watched him from the window, snowflakes scattering across his black coat. When the door closed, the silence returned deep enough for her to hear her own heartbeat. She turned back to her desk, flipping through the drawings again, comparing them to older records. Every modification led to the same point: the lower levels of the site, all marked with strange alphanumeric codes. She began taking notes, then logged into the company's internal network. The Mrs. Whitman account had limited clearance, but just enough to uncover what she shouldn't have seen. The Red Hook Development Zone wasn't listed under its public file name. It was tied to a hidden sub-project RH Omega funded by a shell company in Panama. And the last note at the bottom of the report made her blood run cold. Secure Storage Facility Strategic Cargo. Strategic cargo. She didn't need to be part of the underworld to understand what that meant. That evening when Henry returned, Emily was waiting in the living room. The fire from the hearth painted her face in warm amber tones, but her expression was still. What are you hiding from me about Red Hook? Henry stopped mid-step, removing his gloves. You hacked into my system. You didn't answer my question. He paused, exhaled slowly, his voice lower. That's something I need to handle. It's not yours to worry about. And what if the signature on the project belongs to me? She shot back, her voice shaking not from fear but fury. Did you make me your cover? Henry approached his presence, filling the space, quiet but charged. You're not my cover. You're the only shield keeping people from coming after me. Emily gave a brittle laugh. That's comforting. I'm your wife, but only so you can buy yourself time. No, his voice roughened. You exist because I needed to believe something in this world wouldn't betray me. The words struck her harder than she expected. For a moment she saw him, not the powerful guarded man, but someone standing between two worlds. One he ruled with blood, and one he longed for, but could never touch. She whispered, You can't build trust on lies, Henry. He looked down, his voice quiet. Maybe, but sometimes lies are the only way to keep the truth alive. Night fell. Henry left again, saying he had to finish the rest. Emily couldn't sleep. She stood by the glass wall, watching the faint silhouette of his car disappear into the snowfall. She thought of Venturi's words at the gala. Be careful, darling. Henry keeps everything he touches, even when it's broken. The warning now echoed like prophecy. She opened her laptop again, diving deeper. This time, she breached the internal satellite surveillance logs. Images appeared the Red Hook site at night. Military trucks moving in and out, yellow floodlights cutting through the fog. And there, stamped clearly on each vehicle, Whitman Group. The door swung open behind her. Henry stood there. The light from the screen glinted in his eyes, casting half his face in shadow. What are you doing? Emily froze, snapping the laptop shut too late. Henry strode toward her, grasping her wrist. His expression wasn't cold. This time it was something else. Panic. Maybe fear. What did you see? What you didn't tell me, she said, voice trembling but steady. Red Hook isn't redevelopment. You're hiding something. Weapons laundering. Or enough. Henry snapped, his grip tightening. You don't understand. Then make me understand. He stared at her for a long moment, then released her wrist. His shoulders sank, his voice worn thin. I was trying to keep you out of this. Out of what? Henry turned away, his words quiet but heavy as lead. Red Hook is the last chapter of a contract between Venturi and me. Years ago, we worked together transporting weapons. Grace, my wife, found out. She wanted to leave, wanted to expose us. Then came the explosion. Venturi lost his man. I lost her. And now he wants me to finish what we started or lose everything. The room went still. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, whispering names that belonged to ghosts. Emily's voice broke the silence, faint but trembling. Do you believe you're innocent? Henry looked at her eyes, dark, unflinching, and unbearably honest. I don't know. I just know if I fail this time, more people will die. Maybe you. She stepped back, breath caught in her throat. Why do you think I'd stay after hearing that Henry let out a low, humorless laugh, stripped of all arrogance? Because you don't run, you never have. He turned his voice softer, now resigned. Tomorrow I'll clean this up. You won't have to touch Red Hook again. I'll take care of the rest. She watched him leave an ache forming in her chest, a mixture of fear and something far more dangerous, compassion. This man, burdened by blood and guilt, still tried to protect others in the most destructive way imaginable. When the door closed, Emily sat before the darkened screen staring into her own reflection. No matter what Henry wanted, she knew the truth would find them both the way light always found its way to shadow. On the desk, her wedding ring caught the glow of the fire glinting like a crack in glass. Beautiful but ready to shatter at the slightest touch. And in the quiet of that winter night, as the snow kept falling, Emily felt it a fracture forming deep within her, spreading slowly from her heart to her breath. That afternoon, rain poured relentlessly over Chicago. It fell as if trying to wash everything away, the glass towers, the neon signs, and the stains of the past that no one dared to speak of. Henry had left early. Emily didn't ask where he was going. She simply stood behind the glass wall, watching the black car disappear beyond the pines, leaving behind a hollow space inside her chest. She reopened the Red Hook map. The coordinates marked in the blueprints led to an area on the city's outskirts, a long-abandoned factory from the Second World War. She hesitated for a moment, then grabbed her raincoat and drove off. The roads leading to Red Hook were deserted and bleak, the power poles leaning the smell of wet metal rising from the ground. When she reached the gate, she saw a high steel fence and a tilted sign that read "Restricted Area, Authorized Personnel Only." Emily stepped out. The wind hit hard, blowing rain into her face. A man in protective gear approached. "Sorry, ma'am, this site's off limits. I'm Emily Whitman," she said calmly. "I designed this facility." The man froze. His eyes widened, then quickly dropped in recognition. "Oh, Mrs. Whitman, Mr. Henry told us if I came, then what? That we should let you look, but not answer any questions." Emily met his gaze, then said nothing. She walked past him into the site. Inside, the construction grounds stretched wide, half-covered with tarps. The sounds of welding cranes and rain merged into a metallic rhythm, chaos, yet eerily harmonious like a soundtrack to deceit. She walked deeper into the main zone. At the center stood massive steel frames, being welded into a strange formation, not housing, not a warehouse. A sealed structure, windowless, doorless, built to hide something, not to hold people. Emily pulled out her phone to snap a few pictures. Then a familiar voice cut through the rain. "I told you not to come here." Henry stood a few meters away, coat-drenched hair slicked to his forehead. Eyes dark and furious. The rain had carved sharp lines across his face like a statue come to life. "You told me to stay away," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "And the more you hide, the more I need to know." "What are you building, Henry?" He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "The kind of thing that if I tell you, you won't want to stay with me anymore, then tell me." He stared at her long enough for her to draw a deep breath just to stay upright. "It's Venturi's weapons vault. I'm finishing it in exchange for what he's keeping. The original files about Grace. Proof that she didn't die in an accident. She was murdered." The words sliced the air like glass. Emily stepped back, eyes wide. "What did you say Venturi staged the explosion? But the police never had evidence. I made a deal finish this, and he gives me the files. I need the truth." Rain mixed with tears as she shook her head. "You're trading lives to clear the name of someone already gone. Do you think Grace would want that?" Henry lowered his eyes, voice rough and cracked. "I have nothing left to lose. She died because of me, Emily. She tried to pull me out of this world, and I didn't save her. The least I can do is find out who really killed her." "And what if that person is you?" she whispered. Henry looked up, his gaze so broken it made her flinch. "I've asked myself that every day. Some nights I dream of holding the detonator in my hand, and I can't tell if it's memory or guilt." Rain battered the metal roof above them, the sound like 1,000 small stones falling. In that moment, Emily saw him not as a criminal, but as a man consumed not by greed, but by his own ghosts. She stepped closer, pressing her hand to his chest. "Henry, You can't save the past by destroying the present. He looked down at her hand, rising instinctively to grasp her wrist, holding it as if afraid she might disappear. Then, tell me what to do. Stop. I can't. Try, not while Venturi's still breathing. The answer was quiet but cold as a blade. Emily pulled her hand free, voice trembling. You're walking a road that will make you lose everything again. You don't understand, he snapped, then fell silent as if even he feared the truth in his own voice. She looked at him for a long time, rain glistening at the corner of her eyes. Then she turned away. The drive back was wordless. Rain lashed against the windshield, the wipers keeping a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The city outside blurred into streaks of light. Did you ever really love Grace? Emily finally asked. Henry gave a hollow laugh. She was the only light I ever believed in, and I turned that light into ash. What about me? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. Henry's grip tightened on the wheel. The car swerved slightly. He turned eyes like deep water. You're not her. Grace was sunrise. You're the storm. Storms destroy Henry. But they remind me I'm still alive. For a second, amid the rain and heartbeat, something inside her cracked. Emily turned away, hiding the tear that slipped down her cheek. That night, the lake house felt colder than usual. Henry stood by the window, untouched glass of whiskey in hand. Emily walked down the hall, stopping when she saw him. His reflection in the glass looked distant, broken. You're going to meet Venturi, aren't you, tomorrow? Are you insane? He wants you dead. Henry's lips curved faintly like a fragile light flickering in the storm. Maybe. But if I don't go, he'll come here. And this time, I won't let anyone else pay for me. Emily stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him from behind. For the first time, he didn't resist. He stood still, letting her hold him tighter, as if her warmth was the last thing anchoring him to this world. You don't have to atone with blood, she whispered. He turned, resting his forehead gently against hers. And you. Don't try to save me. I'm not worth losing your faith over. You know nothing about women, Henry, she said softly. We don't love perfection. We love those who know they've sinned and still have a heart left to give. Henry kissed her forehead light, as a vow painful as goodbye. Go to sleep, Emily. And you, maybe I'll stay awake until morning. When she woke in the middle of the night, the bed beside her was empty. The window was open, rain seeping in through the cold wind. On the desk lay a folded note written in his precise hand. If I don't come back, don't look for me. Live, Emily. Because one of us deserves to be forgiven. H. She sank to her knees, tears blending with the sound of rain outside. From far away came the echo of an engine fading, then gone. Out there through the white veil of rain, Henry's black car was already cutting across the city, toward Venturi, toward the thin, sharp line that separated guilt from redemption. Emily stood by the door, watching through the storm. Her heart felt as though it had been torn between fear and love. She knew that when that door closed, Henry wasn't the only one walking into darkness. Part of her was going with him. Rain was still falling when Henry reached the southern docks, the place where the city ended in a stretch of cold steel and gray water. The yellow glow from the old cranes reflected on the soaked concrete, breaking into fragments of trembling light. The wind carried the scent of salt gasoline and something else, the smell of unfinished truths. His car stopped a short distance from Warehouse 12. Henry stepped out his coat, drenched within seconds. From his pocket, he drew a small pistol, not as a threat but as instinct, the reflex of a man who'd lived too long on the edge of survival. Out of the shadows, a voice spoke calm, smooth, and sharp, as metal sliding against a blade. Always on time, Henry. Venturi was leaning against a steel column, a half-burned cigarette glowing between his fingers. The ember flared, lighting up half his face, half smile, half scar. Did you bring what I asked for? Henry's voice was flat. Always, Venturi replied, pulling a sealed envelope from his coat pocket tied with a red wax string. Grace Whitman's file. The original's autopsy reports, photos, investigation recordings. In exchange, I want Red Hook completed within a week, and the main vault key before sunrise on the 8th day. Henry looked at the envelope, then passed it. It at the man who had once been his ally. You killed her, didn't you? Venturi chuckled softly, exhaling smoke as if the accusation were almost amusing. Henry, if I'd killed Grace, do you really think you'd still be standing here asking me? Henry's hand tightened on the gun. Don't play games with me. I'm not, Venturi said lightly. She knew too much. But I wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. The wind whipped between them, carrying the rain sideways. Then, Henry's voice broke through the storm. Venturi began to walk forward, each step echoing sharply on the wet concrete. She was killed because of you, Henry. But not by me. For a heartbeat, everything went silent, except the rain. The cruelest thing about the truth, Venturi went on, eyes glinting like those of a predator that had already tasted blood, is that it never comes when you're ready. It waits until you're too broken to bear it. He tossed the envelope into the air. It hit a puddle and burst open papers, scattering photographs, bleeding their colors into the rain. One showed a woman's face, beautiful, serene, even as the flames consumed her. Henry fell to his knees. His hand trembled as he picked up the last photo, a charred wedding ring lying amid ashes. She tried to tell you something, Venturi murmured. But you didn't listen. You were always too busy trying to save everyone else, Henry, and never learned how to save yourself. Henry rose, gun aimed straight at Venturi's chest. And you, a devil in a friend's skin, thinking you have the right to judge me? Venturi's smile sliced through the darkness. We're both devils, Henry. The only difference is, you still beg to be forgiven. A distant foghorn moaned across the harbor, long, mournful, unending. The rain grew heavier, blurring every outline. Henry didn't pull the trigger. He just took one step back, turned, and walked away, leaving Venturi's laughter behind to mix with the wind. By the time he returned home, dawn was breaking. The lake house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. Emily sat in the armchair, wrapped in a thin sweater, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Where were you? She asked, her voice raw, calm, but frighteningly calm. Henry didn't answer. He placed the gun on the table beside the rain-soaked envelope. This. She stared at it, not touching. Did you find the truth? He was silent for a moment, then whispered, I don't know what's true anymore. I just know the woman I loved died because of me. And the woman I love now might die trying to save me. Her breath caught. What did you just say? Henry looked up, his gaze raw, stripped of all armor. I love you, Emily. It wasn't a confession. It was a sentence, a surrender. He stepped closer. The smell of rain clung to him, cold, intoxicating. You make me want to stop. But it's too late. Venturi won't let me live if I break the deal. Then don't play by his rules, she said, her voice trembling. We can leave, Henry, both of us. I don't need your money or your empire. I just need you alive. Henry gave a small, bitter smile, the kind of smile that knows hope is already dead. You think I can run? I've spent my whole life running Emily. This time I have to end it. She caught his hand, gripping it tight. Then I'll go with you. No, don't stop me. I'm not stopping you. I'm protecting you. Her eyes glistened, but her voice was firm. Henry, you don't understand. Love isn't about protecting. It's about enduring together. He fell silent. Outside, the wind rustled through the pines, whispering like ghosts. You once asked if I believed in forgiveness, he said quietly. Now I do. But not for me, for you. For loving someone like me. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small hard drive. It has everything Red Hook's data. If I don't come back in 2 days, give it to the police, under your name. Henry, he's silenced her with a kiss. Not hurried, not desperate, but slow final. A kiss that tasted of rain and farewell. When he pulled away, her tears were already falling. Don't do this, Henry. If this is the end, he murmured, then let me end it knowing you're still alive. And he walked away. By afternoon, the rain had stopped. Emily went to the lake. The water was calm, mirroring the gray sky. She sat on the wooden pier, the hard drive clenched in her palm. Her phone rang Henry's name on the screen. She answered, her hands trembling. Where are you? She asked. At the docks, his voice came hoarse, broken. Venturi knows. He knows I betrayed him. Emily, listen, don't come here. Henry, please. A gunshot exploded through the call. Then silence. The phone slipped from her hand, shattering against the pier. She ran to the car. The road to the docks was slick and narrow wind cutting against her face. By the time she arrived, the place was deserted. The police hadn't come yet, only the flickering lights of the harbor reflected on the water. Inside Warehouse 12, the air reeked of gunpowder and smoke. A dark trail of blood stretched across the concrete. In a puddle near the door, something gleamed, a burnt wedding ring. Not Grace's. Henry's, the one he'd worn since their fake marriage began. Emily fell to her knees. Her trembling hand reached for the cold metal. Outside, rain began to fall again. She lifted her head eyes, scanning the darkness, and saw a shadow move at the far corner. A deep voice echoed faintly through the storm. "You shouldn't have come, Mrs. Whitman." She spun around, but whoever it was had already vanished into the smoke. In the distance, police sirens wailed, faint approaching, mixing with the rhythm of the tide. Emily stayed there in the middle of the empty dock, clutching the ring against her heart. For the first time, she didn't know whether she was crying for the dead, or for the one she still refused to believe was truly gone. 3 days after the shootout at the docks, the newspapers printed a brief report. Billionaire Henry Whitman presumed missing following an armed confrontation with weapons trafficker Marco Venturi. Police are investigating. Emily read the same line over and over, her eyes dry, as though she had run out of tears long ago. No body was found, only a fallen gun, a streak of blood, and the charred wedding ring he used to wear. The lake house was silent, a tomb built of glass and memory. Every corner, every whisper of wind carried his presence. Sometimes she thought she heard Henry's footsteps down the hall or his quiet voice saying, "Emily, your coffee's getting cold." But there was only silence, vast, merciless silence. On the 4th morning, Emily woke before dawn. Outside the window, Lake Michigan breathed cold mist like a vast mirror reflecting a colorless sky. She opened her laptop, intending to delete everything tied to the Whitman Group contracts files, the Red Hook project. But as her cursor hovered over delete, a hidden file appeared, Grace Whitman Final. Her pulse slowed. She clicked. It was a 6-minute audio recording, dated 3 years earlier, 1 week before Grace's death. "Henry, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. I know Venturi's watching you, but the one you should fear isn't him. It's yourself. Can't you see they've turned you into a weapon? Red Hook isn't your project. It's a trap." Grace's voice trembled, fragile like wind brushing against glass. "If someone ever has the courage to pull you out of the dark, let her. Don't push her away like you pushed me." Emily closed the laptop, her hands trembling. Outside, the morning light slowly spilled into the room, faint, uncertain, but real. The fragile kind of light that meant something hadn't ended yet. By noon, she was at the police station. Detective Ruiz, the officer in charge of the case, looked at her with a mix of sympathy and caution. "Mrs. Whitman, we've searched the entire harbor. There's no body matching your husband's description." "He's alive," Emily said without hesitation. "On what basis?" "A recording from Grace Whitman. I think Henry knew something about that explosion 3 years ago, and maybe he never stopped trying to uncover it." Ruiz sighed. "You need rest, ma'am. All the evidence indicates—" No, Emily interrupted, her voice calm, but threaded with quiet steel. "If Henry's alive, I'll find him." That afternoon, she went to the Whitman Group headquarters, once his empire. The 47th floor looked unchanged, glass floors, raw concrete walls, and the faint lingering scent of sandalwood. Former employees bowed their heads politely, avoiding her eyes. She could feel their fear, not of her, but of the name Whitman, of the shadows that came with it. On Henry's desk, she found a small key engraved with the symbol O, the emblem of Red Hook. Beneath it lay a folded note. "If you're reading this, it means I've failed to leave the darkness. But at least I believe you still can." At the bottom was an address, Omega Research Facility, basement level 3. Night fell as she drove toward Red Hook. A snowstorm had begun again. The headlights swept across the abandoned site, a ruin of steel and frost. The main gate was locked, but she slipped in through a rusted side fence. Inside, the basement glowed faintly with pale neon light. The air was metallic and cold. Emily followed a long corridor until she reached a glass door marked Omega Control Room. The door hissed open. A gust of chilled air brushed her face. There was someone inside. Henry. He stood at the control table, back turned, shirt damp, a dried smear of blood on his shoulder. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. It was like time folding in on itself. Henry? Her voice cracked. He turned slowly. His gaze was calm, as though he had expected this moment all along. You shouldn't be here. You're alive, she gasped. Why didn't you tell me? Why let everyone think you were dead? He placed a hand on the console, his voice low, worn, but steady. Because I needed to disappear. Red Hook isn't finished, and if I stayed, you wouldn't be safe. She took a step toward him, eyes fixed on his. I don't care about safe. I care about you. You don't understand, Emily. This isn't just my war. Grace died because she discovered what Omega really was. It's not a weapons depot, it's a bioweapons program. Venturi was just the face. There's someone bigger behind it. Her breath misted in the cold air. What are you going to do? Destroy it, Henry said, eyes hard. I've armed the self-destruct system. Once triggered, every trace of Omega will be gone. And you'll die with it. He said nothing. You'll die too, she whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. Henry looked at her deeply, quietly, then reached for her hand. I once thought I could never be forgiven. But you made me believe even the lost can find their way back. Then, come back with me, Henry. He shook his head. It's too late. Don't say that. He smiled faintly, that tender, sorrowful smile that broke her heart every time. Do you remember the first thing I ever told you? Never trust me when I smile. Her throat tightened. Henry opened the control panel and entered a code. A red light began to flash. Go, Emily. The system detonates in 10 minutes. She didn't move. If you stay, I stay. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes burning with something she'd never seen before, desperation, not fear. Please, Emily, live for me. No, you're coming with me. He held her tighter, then suddenly pulled her close and kissed her. A deep, desperate kiss, tasting of blood, rain, and everything they'd never said aloud. When he finally let go, his voice was a whisper against her ear. The north door will open when the blast triggers. Go. Don't look back. Henry. He shoved her away hard enough to make her stumble. The glass door slammed shut between them. Emily pounded against it, screaming, Henry. Open the door. Do you hear me? He stood still on the other side, calm, resolute. The red lights pulsed beneath his feet. Henry lifted his hand, pressing his palm against the glass where hers trembled. Thank you for coming back. A flash of white light burst through the room. Emily screamed, but the explosion swallowed her voice. When she opened her eyes, there was only ash and smoke. The night sky burned orange, the snow melting into steam. Hands dragged her out of the wreckage, police medics flashing lights. She turned toward what was once the Omega facility. Nothing remained, only a hollow scar in the earth where Red Hook had stood. In her hand, she still clutched a scorched ring Henry's, the last piece of him. She didn't cry. She just looked up at the sky, pale light breaking through the clouds. And in that boundless silence, she heard something faint, a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat, distant but alive. She didn't know if it was real or not. But she smiled. Because sometimes love doesn't end in death. It ends in the moment you realize the one you lost never really left. 3 months after the explosion at Red Hook, Chicago thawed. The snow retreated from the streets, leaving dark streaks of water, like memories that refused to fade. The city was waking again, slowly, hesitantly, as if everyone was trying to forget. Emily returned to life, or at least what was left of it. She moved out of the lake house, rented a small apartment near downtown, where the morning light streamed through glass walls. Every day she went to her new design firm, where colleagues only knew her as Emily Cooper. No one spoke the name Whitman anymore. But at night, when the city drowned in the sound of distant trains, she still dreamed of Henry. Not Henry the billionaire in tailored suits, but Henry standing behind glass, his hand pressed to it, smiling that half smile she had once feared, and now clung to as the only thing that kept her breathing. One afternoon, while gathering her sketches, Emily received a small parcel, no return name, no address. Inside was a simple wooden box and a folded sheet of white paper. The handwriting slanted. Confident made her heart stop. Some things can't die in fire. H. Her pulse quickened. Beneath the note was a small hard drive the same kind Henry once gave her. She plugged it into her laptop. The screen lit up. A single file appeared, Omega Reborn. She opened it. The grainy video began to play footage from a security camera. Henry. He was inside a bunker, smoke thick in the air, alarms flashing red. He was wounded, blood seeping through his shirt, but alive. If you're watching this, his voice rasped uneven. Then I did what Grace wanted. I didn't die in the explosion. But I can't come back, not yet. He lifted his head and looked straight into the camera. Red Hook wasn't just a project. It was a doorway. They're building a new Omega branch in Europe. I'm going to finish this, even if it costs me the rest of my life. He paused, took a shaky breath. And Emily, if you're still in Chicago, Liv, don't let my sins become your burden. You are the only reason I remember I still have a soul. The video ended. Emily sat motionless, her eyes blurred but dry. Then slowly she smiled a small, broken, beautiful smile. He was alive. Somewhere beneath another sky, Henry was still fighting the darkness and still thinking of her. A week later, Emily attended the opening of Reborn Spaces, an architectural exhibition showcasing the restoration of abandoned industrial sites. Her name was on the guest list, one of the young architects to watch. No one knew that most of her submitted designs were based on Henry's old sketches, steel curves, glass walls, light spilling through open structures. Architecture, she had written in her project notes, is humanity's way of saying sorry to the world. As the lights dimmed and the hall glowed, Emily walked slowly between the models and panels. On the far wall, there was a small section without an author's name, only a metal inscription. To those who choose light even when it burns. Her hand trembled as she touched the words. Just below a black and white photograph was mounted. It showed the Red Hook docks after the explosion, a landscape of ruin. But in the bottom corner, almost hidden in the smoke, was the faint outline of a man walking away. She knew that silhouette. Henry. That evening, Emily left the gallery and walked along the lake. The air was still cold, but the trees had begun to bud. April skies over Chicago were a pale gray, tinged with gold. She stopped by a small cafe along the waterfront, the same one where she and Henry had met for the first time, after signing their fake marriage contract. The cafe hadn't changed warm amber light, the scent of Arabica, an old jazz tune playing softly through a crackling speaker. She chose their old table. When the waiter brought her coffee, she noticed a tiny folded note stuck beneath the cup. Friday, 5:30 p.m. Michigan Pier. No signature. Her hands shook. That familiar mix of fear and belief surged through her, and the world seemed to move in slow motion. Friday came. The pier was nearly empty. The wind carried the scent of cold metal and river water. The sun hung low, scattering gold across the waves. Emily waited. Time moved like molasses, every minute stretching into eternity. Each sound made her turn footsteps gulls the creak of boats, but it was never him. Then, at 5:35, she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, measured, so familiar her heart stopped beating. "You actually came?" a voice said low, hoarse, carried by the wind. Emily turned. Henry stood there in a gray coat. Hair shorter, face thinner, but his eyes were the same. Amber and shadow intertwined. She didn't speak. She just stepped forward and touched him gently, as if afraid he'd vanish. But he was solid, warm. He smelled of smoke rain and something achingly familiar. "I knew you were alive," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "And you still kept looking. You should have come back." "I couldn't. But I couldn't leave without seeing you one last time." The wind carried her hair across his cheek. They stood there silent, suspended between the past and what would never be. Finally, Henry spoke. "I'm leaving the country. Omega isn't finished yet. But this time, I'm not running. I'm going to make it right." She looked up, her eyes shimmering in the fading light. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" "No," he said softly. "You don't have to believe it. Just remember that somewhere in this world there was a man who loved you enough to risk everything. Emily took his hand and held it tightly. Henry, if there's another life, don't save anyone. Just live. He smiled, the kind that broke and healed her all at once, and leaned down to kiss her forehead. If there's another life, I'll come sooner, before the world has a chance to hurt you. When she opened her eyes, he was already stepping back. The wind swept across the pier, carrying the haze of dusk between them. He turned and walked away toward the end of the dock, where the light swallowed his shadow. She stood there long after he disappeared, until the sky turned violet. In her coat pocket, she found a small USB drive he had left behind. Engraved on it were the words, "For the day you choose light." Emily smiled, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She looked out over the lake at the water shimmering in the last light, the witness of their love, their guilt, their redemption. And there, among wind, water, and light, she knew Henry was still out there, still fighting, still keeping his promise to live, as if a soul was still waiting to be forgiven. A year later. Spring had returned to Chicago in full bloom. The city no longer sighed under the weight of winter. The lakefront streets shimmered with cherry blossoms, and the sound of wind brushing softly through open windows. Inside the newly inaugurated Whitman Foundation for Urban Renewal, Emily stood on stage with a microphone in hand. The audience fell silent. Behind her, the foundation's logo glowed two interlocking circles, one light, one shadow projected against a vast glass backdrop. A year ago, she began her voice steady. Red Hook was ashes. Today, on that very ground, stands our first community center for those who lost their homes, for the children who lost faith in this city. Her words were even and calm, but her eyes carried an ocean of memory. Someone once told me light only exists when we're brave enough to face our own darkness. I think he was right. She paused, a faint smile touching her lips. Applause broke out, but she barely heard it. Through the glass wall behind the stage, she saw the sunset spilling gold across Lake Michigan, the same color as the last evening she had seen Henry. When the ceremony ended, Emily stayed alone in the exhibition room upstairs. The space glowed in amber light, quiet, as if time itself had stopped. On the wall hung a large photograph of Red Hook, after its rebirth, glass buildings gleaming in sunlight, reflecting clouds, no trace of ruin left. Beneath it, a steel engraving read, "Dedicated to H.W. For the man who believed broken things can still shine." She stood there for a long while before whispering, "Do you see this, Henry?" We kept our promise. That night, Emily drove out of the city down the familiar road leading to the old lake house. The property now belonged to the foundation, but she still kept the key. When she opened the door, the scent of old wood and sandalwood flooded the air, so familiar it made her chest ache. The living room was unchanged, the fireplace, the piano, the glass wall facing the lake. Everything was still except for the sound of waves brushing against the shore. She set her bag down and walked to the window, the same place they used to sit together on cold mornings. The night breeze slipped through the cracks. She whispered softly, "You once said when the light turns away, the darkness opens its door. Now it's the other way around, Henry. I've learned to walk into the light, and I'm not afraid anymore." A tear slid down her cheek, not from sorrow this time, but from peace. She had reached the end of the road they had begun together. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind her. Emily turned. A man stood in the doorway, tall, still, his gray coat blending into the dim light. He didn't speak. The golden glow from the hallway fell across his face, and in that instant, that single heartbeat, her world stopped. "Henry?" He nodded gently. "I told you I'd come back, didn't I?" Her breath caught. She stepped closer, trembling, reaching to touch his face. Warm skin, real breath, real eyes, no dream. Not this time. "You survived." "Barely," he murmured, his voice hoarse but steady. "I left Europe 2 weeks ago. Omega's gone. The people behind it arrested. And me. There was only one place left I wanted to return to." She didn't answer. She just threw her arms around him. They stood in the old room silent while the lake wind carried the scent of rain and memory through the open door. "I used to think I wasn't worthy of love," he said quietly, his voice breaking. But you taught me that love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. And you taught me, she replied, that forgiveness isn't for others, it's for ourselves. He smiled, the first true smile she'd seen on his face in what felt like forever. Then I guess we've both learned what we came here to learn. The next morning, sunlight poured across the lake. Henry stood at the kitchen counter making coffee. Emily leaned against the doorway watching him. The scene was so simple, so quiet, and suddenly she understood. Happiness isn't something you chase. It's what happens when you finally stop running. He handed her a cup, his smile soft as light through glass. No sugar, right? She laughed, a clear tear slipping down, but it wasn't sad. The first time you asked me that I hated you. I know, Henry said, a playful spark in his eyes. And now. She looked up at him. I just know that if I had to choose again, I'd still walk through that door. He tilted his head slightly. Even knowing how it ends. No matter how it ends, she said it brought me here. They stood by the glass wall together, watching the sun rise over the water, scattering into 1,000 crystal fragments. That afternoon, Henry and Emily visited the new Red Hook site. Children ran through the open square, their laughter echoing between the glass buildings. A little boy ran up and handed Emily a wildflower. Miss, this place is so pretty. Did you build it? She smiled, kneeling to his height. Not just me. Someone once taught me that everything broken can begin again. The boy grinned and ran off. Henry watched her, his gaze filled with a peace she had never seen in him before. You see, he said softly. Sometimes cracks aren't meant to hide, they're where the light comes through. She nodded, taking his hand, strong, warm, and real. That night, as the city lit up, they stood on the rooftop of the foundation building, the skyline stretching over Lake Michigan. Henry rested his hands on the railing, the wind moving through his hair. Do you believe in fate? He asked. No, she said. I believe in people brave enough to love even when love might destroy them. He smiled and leaned in, kissing her, not a beginning, not an ending, but the kind of kiss that happens when two souls finally find their way home. The next morning, a headline ran on the front page. Whitman Foundation launches the Grace Project, a scholarship program for women in design and urban development. Below it was a photo of Emily and Henry standing side by side, smiling softly, their eyes turned toward the lake. Next to them, engraved on the building's glass wall, were the words, "We rebuild because love does." If you've ever lost faith, remember this light never truly leaves. It only waits for the moment you're brave enough to open your eyes again. Because sometimes true love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about learning to see the beauty in what was once broken.